about growing up in Leigh? Your dad was a lorry driver. Your mum was a headmistress. Were they passionate about politics?
Well, no. I mean, they were Labour voters and they were socialists. I mean, I think my best description of my dad was a syndicalist. He believed in trade union power. But, I mean, I think my dad probably, who was a strong anti-racist and a strong kind of believer in social justice, might be one of the few people who heckled Tony Benn, because Benn came to Leigh in the late 70s on one of the leadership campaigns, and I said to my dad, what happened? Because I missed it. He said, well, we heckled him because he didn't answer the questions. And I said, come on, I loved Tony Benn at that point. I was really into the Benn for deputy or Benn for leader, whichever it was. And my dad said, he's just another politician. So they had that kind of, as many people in Leigh have, and I think of it, as it's just gone Tory. There's a very strong anti-establishment thing that way predates Brexit, way predates the culture war. But growing up, it was brilliant. I had such a brilliant childhood in Leigh, partly because of my parents, but partly because of the very strong community and society that was around me, that did feel like a protective cocoon. In one of my books, in Clear Bright Future, I describe going to a miners' gala, which is, fist fights and all sorts going on. It's like a cross between a riot and a fair. And in retrospect, looking back on it, almost everybody on that field was employed by the state. We were given milk free by the state. Their houses there were council houses. People's relationship with the state and community was incredibly different to what it is now in this insecure and febrile world that we live in now.
You mentioned Leigh, the fact that Leigh has gone Tory. Why? Why did that happen in your view? Of course, it wasn't unique at the last election.
Well, this is the big challenge that we Social Democrats, radical Social Democrats in my case, are trying to deal with. I think it was a long time coming, because people got the impression under the kind of Blair government that from now on they would be dependent on a state. Yes, there would be a decent welfare system. Yes, Sure Start and tax credits were there to keep you from being absolutely poverty stricken. But nobody seemed concerned that the entire industrial heart had been ripped out of that and many other communities. And those of us who were concerned were told we were backward looking, etc. I think in addition, obviously Brexit had a lot to do with it, but even there, there's been a tilt rather than a groundswell. I had the experience of having the door slammed in my face in 2019, but I also had the experience of young people, just as we call ourselves Lathers, we're just as Lath as me, more Lath because they live there, running out of their houses in their slippers to join us leafleting. So the town had become polarized. The demographics are quite heavily tilted towards older people and people with property, that's they own their houses. If you don't have any property and you're younger, what do? There's a great incentive to move to the edge of the constituency or out of it. And so I think a mixture of demographic change, Brexit, Jeremy Corbyn, there's places where Jeremy Corbyn played really well on the doorstep. Leigh isn't one of them. And that long-term problem that British social democracy has of who's part of our tribal alliance. I think it is a tribal alliance, always has been. It has to be a bigger alliance to get back into power in places like Leigh.
Lots to unpack there. Probably the first one is, of course, you were a big supporter of Jeremy Corbyn. With the benefit of hindsight, do you think I got it wrong?
No, absolutely not. I mean, I went right out on it was Corbyn's victory in the original leadership election that was one of the factors that made me quit my job at Channel 4. I mean, there were others. I got sick of being a kind of stenographer at the Bank of England and kind of getting told off when you contradicted them. But mainly I realized there was a once in a lifetime opportunity. Benn was another opportunity which failed for the left to show whether it could indeed shape British Labourism in a different direction. And yeah, I mean, I supported him in both of those leadership elections. But I have to tell you that, you know, there was a rally in July 2016 in a big theatre in Camden when everything was on a knife edge, when the Labour NEC was trying to keep Jeremy off the second ballot paper. And I think we were going to be in court over it. And it was my job was to be a kind of warm up for Corbyn and McDonnell, among others, some comedians, etc. And I stood up, and the first thing I said is, I don't give a shit about Jeremy Corbyn. And that kind of silenced the crowd a bit, because I wanted, and the argument I put is, this is about whether we can create a sustainable leadership by the left in the Labour Party. Now, in the end, if you've read my cuttings, you will know that by May 2019, I was calling for his closest advisors to be sacked. That was obviously a proxy for saying, well, come on, Jeremy, you're on borrowed time. And it wasn't just because I think he took the wrong position again and again on the second referendum and Brexit. It was because all of those things I came into politics to fight, which is like bureaucratism, mind-numbing refusal to see facts, anti-professionalism, I think were by then dominating the discourse around Corbyn. And I think it could have been turned around with a big change after May 2019, probably not, but it might have been. And so by the time we went into the autumn of the prorogation crisis and the general election, it was pretty clear that what we tried to do hadn't worked. Now, I still think a version of it could work. I don't know whether we'll ever get the chance again, because the coalition that Labour now needs to build because of demographic change, national breakup in the UK, it just has to be wider, and it has to include both my mates from Lee, the ex-miners, who are way to the left of me. Lee Momentum is full of ex-miners who are way to the left of me. Sitting at the other end of the Working Men's Club are people who voted BNP and UKIP and Brexit Party. And in the middle, there hasn't been enough. There's not been, the political civil society has been quite polarized. So we have to try and create an alliance of everybody who wants economic and social justice, and therefore I'm not sure we'll ever get the chance in a generation for the left to show that it could lead the party from the front, as it were.
You said in one of your earlier answers, you described yourself as a radical social democrat. Why did you choose those words rather than socialist?
Well, I've written a book called Post-Capitalism, which explains that the original, or argues that the original socialist route beyond capitalism is A, closed off, and B, not preferential, not preferred by me. What I think is that automation, the use of technology to create and widen what we call the commons, so non-owned areas of the economy in which we collaborate without ownership or exchange, that's the route for me. Beyond capitalism. It is a long one. It's one that's going to take us a long time. Now, I also saw in the mid 2010s what I think was the emergence of a radical social democracy. I was very close to, both physically proximate and politically, to be honest, Alexis Tsipras, when he took on the European Union and the IMF in Greece in 2015. What I observed Tsipras was building was a social democracy. Now, it originated from the communist tradition, the Euro-communist tradition. But in fact, he went out of his way, for example, to do something that I've argued strongly Labour should do, which is to commit absolutely to the Western Alliance, to NATO. I mean, Tsipras went further. One of his first acts was to phone up the Israelis and say, we're not going to pick a quarrel with you. We're going to do deals with you. So all those things that leftists have traditionally thought, right, now's my chance to do some foreign policy sort of upsetting of the apple cart. Tsipras didn't. He said, let's park that. Let's do one thing. Let's deliver economic justice to Greek people. And I would classify Alexis Tsipras as a radical social democrat. I think that's what Pablo Iglesias, another friend and comrade who is the Deputy Prime Minister of Greece, of Spain right now. That's what Pablo Iglesias is. Whatever he started out as, he is functionally a social democrat. Now, what that means isn't that we don't want to overturn capitalism. It means we have to do so through democratic means. And I'm quite happy for somebody to walk up to me in the street and say, "Are you a socialist?" To which I would say yes. But if I'm talking to people who know a little bit more about what the terminology means, I think that radical social democracy encompasses something more than simply economic transformation. It is about a concept of the human being and their rights being at the center of the project. And I'm afraid, just like the word communism, the word socialism, above all democratic socialism, which for my generation means East Germany, not kind of momentum. I'd like to reclaim some of the terminology of social democracy, certainly from the people I opposed in the early 80s, David Owen and the SDP.
So tell us when you discovered revolutionary politics. You were young. I had a flirtation too.
My flirtation is still going on.
Okay.
I mean, in the sense that I've been a Marxist at least since the age of 16, when I discovered the Communist Manifesto in my school library. I really thank the Salesian Order of Don Bosco for stocking that library with a load of radical text. It had an introduction by A.J.P. Taylor, the historian, explaining why it was all bollocks. And in fact, remember in the 60s and 70s, even social democrats thought that capitalism had disappeared. That I think Anthony Crosland wrote this. It's not capitalism anymore because we don't have class struggle and there's no unemployment, etc. Well, the thing is, I was reading this as it was all. Let's keep this clean. It was all going to pot. It was as the we'd had the 3-day week. We'd had we were running around in the dark, me and my school friends, and we were grammar school boys as well, running around in the dark. Not me, but they, stealing things from market stalls because there was no lights. Ministers were coming on TV saying, with candlelight, saying the lights are going out. My dad was on strike again and again, occupying not his workplace, but Union HQ in Salford. I remember that really clearly. So look, the class struggle was taking off. The book said what the class struggle looked like, and it made sense. No, at the other end of 4.5 decades, I would hope that I've learned a lot from the experience of fighting Thatcher, of fighting Blairism, resisting all the wars Britain has fought, including the troops into Northern Ireland as well. And what I think I've learned is that there are two Marxisms, and it's something that it took a long time and was difficult to accept. Edward Thompson, the famous author of The Making of the English Working Class, Thompson wrote this in the mid-70s. There's two Marxisms, and they're incompatible. They're not the same thing. One is a theory based on reason, with the human being at its center. One is anti-humanist, sees history as the driver of history as a machine, as it were, and has historically perpetrated massacres, genocides. You can't sit there saying that they have anything in common. But this was a journey I think I've kind of been on my whole political life, but it became a lot stronger in the mid-2010s. Some of it to do with the way I saw what was going on around communism replicate some of the basic bureaucratic mistakes that I'd fought against all my life, but also because I think that the new problems facing humanity, above all climate change, demand from us a series of answers about priorities. And I want a leftism, a form of socialism, if you like, that puts human rights, human beings, human individual freedom right at its center.
I'm going to rephrase that question a bit, because I asked you when you discovered revolutionary politics. But you were, I think the organization would have described itself as Trotskyist.
Yeah,
the belief that there's a vanguard that needs to lead the working class. I mean, you don't hold with that now?
No, I certainly don't. But what I would say is that we were facing, by the early 1980s, it was obvious to me that the community I'd grown up in the world, because you can only have one world, can't you? It was, I didn't get sent to boarding school or kind of have a secret life. There was one world. It was the world of Lee. It was the world of Bolton. It was the world of mining, cotton, working class accents, rugby league. That's my world. And I could see it all being attacked vindictively by a woman who said there's no such thing as society. Now, what was deployed against us, especially during the miners' strike, was military level, military grade repression. And as we now know, surveillance. I don't regret reaching for the nearest thing I could find, which was a form of organization that was highly effective. That is, if Leninism says you get organized, you become disciplined, and you fight the thing that is fighting. No, what of course, what was interesting at the time is, though the left groups were full of actually very highly educated and dedicated engineering workers and miners and print workers, it never really took off among the working class. The working class remained social democratic in that sense. And you have to look at that and say why. You have to also acknowledge that the whole strategy that we adopted was defeated. And by the middle of the 90s, something new had come along. And that was a form of resistance and opposition to capitalism that weirdly, for those of us who'd been schooled in the old school, was more effective. And that was networked protest, horizontal forms of organization, more cultural and person-centric forms of organization. And I'd like to think that my political trajectory includes many breaks, but one of them was learning from them. I think from that Seattle generation, Genoa, Prague, I was on the Prague demonstration in 2000. It was 1999 rather, I think it was, that you have to learn what works and what doesn't work. And now you can see very clearly why Leninism didn't work. And indeed, I've become much more critical of that entire tradition in politics and pushed my criticisms back to its roots. We're not here for a political lecture, but I could give you one about why the roots of what went wrong with Leninism are rooted in Leninism.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about your journalism. So you become a journalist age 30. You have a really good career.
Well, I'm utterly grateful for it. And I was very lucky because, yes, I mean, I was a professional musician and music academic till the age I was 29, 30. And I was trying even to make it as a freelance musician, performer, music director when I was 30. But I was increasingly drawn to wanting to write. And throughout my life, I think I'd lived on the edge of that. Going back to, when I was 16, I was supposed to do economics and history at A level, and like the last minute, I switched to music, art, and English literature. But I've never been quite sure really. But at that point, from 1989 onwards, when the Berlin Wall fell, I thought, look, history's speeded up now. I need to do more than what I'm doing. This is not fulfilling me, so I'm going to do something else. And so I worked my way into a really welcoming, but quite, in retrospect, strange journalistic culture around the company Reed Business Information, which was part of Reed Elsevier. There's this skyscraper still exists in Sutton in South London, which is 14 stories of niche specialist journalism. So it was like being in a journalism factory. And eventually I managed to get myself several jobs and work my way up the ladder. And what was brilliant is that even though I was a latecomer and not a trained journalist, I didn't do NCTJ, the management there really helped me and nurtured me and spotted me. And if you could do the job, and as one of my colleagues put it, drink 13 pints of Guinness at lunchtime and still file copy, which I couldn't, but he could. If you could do that, you worked your way up. And I ended up in this job, deputy editor of Computer Weekly, during the dot-com boom, when the entire world that we were covering as corporate IT specialists was booming and blossoming. And then Newsnight was looking for unorthodox business correspondents, because they'd been told by the BBC they had to have a business correspondent, but they didn't want a typical one. And so after God knows how many interviews, which was like being tortured, I actually got a job. And the first day I started, for the literally first day on air, 9/11 happened. And the other thing is I hadn't told my friends that I was doing this job because it was indeed a trial. That Newsnight said to me, we'll give you a 3-month contract. If it doesn't work out, you can try and get a job back with somewhere else. So I basically did a soft launch of my TV career. And a lot of my friends are glued to the TV on 9/11. And then up pops me saying what it means to the world economy. And one of them literally rang me up and said, I am hallucinating. So yeah, and I think I loved being at Newsnight, loved even more Channel 4 News because it's news and Newsnight is current affairs. But yeah, I mean, I hope that, like all journalists, that just by standing there and pointing a camera and a microphone at reality, we did some good.
The mainstream media comes in for a lot of flack. Does your experience and your appointments, does it suggest that the MSM is more pluralist than some people might think?
Well, the whole reason I was hired along with Jeff Randall and others at the time was to be more plural, actually in a direction the left is not that keen on, which is taking business seriously qua business. You know, not asking what does it mean that M&S is going to be taken over by Philip Green for society. What does it mean for the shareholders? That was something that that was the start of my television career. No, I think obviously it's become more diverse in terms of the voices. I still think there are remarkably few people with working class backgrounds doing the top level journalism, either in print or TV. It's become a bit like acting, you know, in that series, that Le Carré series, where all three main characters went to the same primary school. It's a little bit like that. No, I think politically, however, I do think we're in the middle of a revolution. The corporate media lost its monopoly on the story around the time Facebook, Twitter, YouTube took off, and there is almost no editorial solution to that. Nothing you do can get it back. So what you need to do is find a use for journalism, and one of the uses for it, I mean, people talk about speaking truth to power. What I always used to say is that what you need is an unflinching gaze at reality. One of my friends and colleagues who unfortunately got murdered in Somalia, Martin Adler, made a fantastic documentary that I always model my work on, which is where he was with a company of the US Army in Iraq, and they're going to arrest somebody, and the guy fights back. And instead of it kind of being over in 5 seconds, there's a sort of 5-minute pub brawl where nobody comes out well. It looks utterly, and all Martin does is he just keeps his camera on what's happening. And I think that was what I was trying to do. I think when we talk about it being diverse, I certainly wasn't bringing a political agenda. I think I was bringing political knowledge. But what I was trying to do was to say, if you stay on this scene long enough, something profound will tell itself. And I think that so much, the worst of mainstream media, I don't know what it's like at your end, but the worst days at the BBC was where a committee of 5 blokes, all from Oxbridge, sat down in a basement at 9 o'clock and said, today, this is the story, go and find it. And at times it was, we want a story about tribe X attacking tribe Y in sub-Saharan Africa. And when you get there and it's the other way around, they said, look harder. You know, I mean, I'm slightly caricaturing here, but that is the worst that I've come across. And of course, the hit journalism that unfortunately the print media still do. So I think we've got a lot still to go. The story of the mainstream media is a survival story at the moment. It's not a bright future ahead of us, guys. How do we make it happen? It's just a survival story to stop the slide towards Fox News, to stop the slide towards disinformation.
You have told us why you were passionate about Jeremy Corbyn and that there was a moment, as you describe it. You backed Keir Starmer in the last Labour leadership race, not Rebecca Long Bailey, the left candidate. How's he doing, Keir Starmer?
Well, like, you know, I said this, I tweeted this, you know, if he ever hits a -30, if he or anybody else who replaces him ever hits -30 again in approval, we should get rid of them. That's as a journalist and not some kind of party hack. That's what I think the function of a political journalist is to say truthful things and hard things. No, I think he's doing all right. Remember that, unfortunately, the Labour brand has been damaged not just by, among one set of people, by what Corbyn did. It's also been damaged among the exact opposite set of people by what Blair and Brown did. And we're seeing the beginnings of the acknowledgement of that, even from quite centrist figures like Rachel Reeves speaking in early to mid-March, when, you know, she's saying, you know, we didn't break from the old economic model fast enough. Good, right. Now, the problem is, why did I do it? Because I think the lesson of Corbyn is you can't run the party one faction against another. You've got to try and build an inclusive leadership. I think he started off trying to build an inclusive leadership. I'm disappointed with a series of whipping decisions leading to the suspension of Corbyn and then the non-readmittance of Corbyn. Well, what have they done? They've effectively created an alienated left. The left, in terms of the membership, despite lots of people leaving, is still the majority. And what does it do functionally? The left is now a transmitter of negativity into all the places we need to keep on board. Places like Stroud, where Labour lost because 3,000 people thought it would be a great idea to vote Green, or places like Bristol. I think what he's doing is laser focused on winning back what Labour calls its foundation seats, and that's not just the Red Wall. It's places like South Swindon. It's places like the northern part of Plymouth, Moorview, where we should be winning, but where if we don't start winning, there's going to be an embedded Tory tradition where there wasn't before. So look, I'm with him on that. I'm not with him on the attacks on the left. I think that my big frustration is it's taken them Labour too long to get to a position where they're outlining vision, narrative, and policy. You know, as a sometime playwright and screenwriter, the only way you tell a story about a person is you put them through trials and tribulations, and they make decisions and they do things. They don't stand up and say, you know, I am Jason Bourne, I'm a tough guy. They stand up and say, you know, Jason Bourne only says 25 words in the movie I worked on. They say, take that. I don't want to see Keir Starmer start doing that, basically, to the Tories.
We talk at a time of turmoil for the royal family. You've obviously talked a lot about transformational change. Is whether or not we continue to have a royal family in this country, is that a symbol for you of whether we will have reached the sort of transformational change that you desire?
No, absolutely not, because I can see a post-capitalist society with a queen. I mean, really, yeah, I can see, or a king. A monarch would they'd have far more constraining powers. And for those of us who are Republicans, and I am a Republican in that general political sense, what I would say is that, as we're about to find in British society, that by removing one, as it were, one old armchair from the stately home, you don't necessarily make the whole stately home any better. That is, what we could do by removing the monarchy precipitately is just inadvertently empower people like Boris Johnson, who, you know, was in defiance of the Supreme Court. So we need to tread very carefully. But I do think that we're at a moment now. It's been coming ever since the Diana episode, but the Meghan Markle-Harry episode has brought it here. And let's be clear about what it is. It's a moment where two sides of the British people are taking sides with two sides of the monarchy. That, if it's not handled right, will very quickly remove the mystique of the monarchy. Will I shed tears? No, I'm a Republican. But do I want it handled in a way that doesn't blow up in our faces? Yes, I do. And I think that when we see the mystique gone, if we then see Scotland go independent, and as I covered that independence referendum, that 16-year-old generation in 2014 will within a decade have, well, they'll have some of them will have 16-year-old kids. You know, by the end of the mid 2030s, there'll be a rising two generations of Scots who want independence. The moment we get to that, whenever we get to Scottish independence, then the whole British Constitution is in jeopardy, because Scotland leaves, it either becomes a monarchy or not. If it's a monarchy, is it the same kind of monarchy? So does the British monarch have the same rights in the Scottish Parliament as they do in the Westminster? And if that's added to Meghan and Harry becoming a kind of alt monarchy, where this is the monarchy we would love to have had. I mean, the guy served his country. He's dealing with his own trauma, whatever that is, in an open and a mature way. She is utterly articulate and engaging. And then, as against what? The next monarch, appears out of his house with, tartan wallpaper and stags' heads on the wall and all the rest of it. I mean, they've got to start thinking quite seriously about how they handle this. And I think a responsible opposition has to, as Starmer has done in the face of the Markle episode, say, we can't leave this to a bunch of well-paid flunkies in the royal household. I mean, no one must believe that the Crown is fact but not fiction, but it's based on a culture that those, on the odd occasion, and you're sure it's the same for you, Laura, that on the odd occasion that one ever brushes against that world that exists between Pall Mall, the Athenaeum, Buckingham Palace, St. James's Palace, and the Jermyn Street, you're thinking this is pre-1789 modernity. They've got to, I think they've just got to slim down the monarchy, make it more constitutional. And the job of doing that, they don't own that job. It's the politicians who own the job, and we, British civil society.
Really interesting to chat to you. We come to the point where at the end of the chats that we do with these people, with our interviews every week, we try and I'm going to start that again because we'll have to edit it out. My screw up. I mean, the way that we end these interviews, conclude these interviews, is try and categorize the politics of the person that we've spoken to, based on the conversation that we've had. You are certainly somebody who is driven by big ideas. I would say that Marx or a Marxist analysis is still something very much that drives you. I think you may have mellowed with age.
I'm a Marxist, but a different kind of Marxist. I'm a social democrat, but we haven't talked about it. The dynamic of climate and climatic survival and getting to zero net carbon must, for me, preempt everything else, including the social and racial and economic justice that is at the heart of my politics. You cannot have social justice on a dead planet. And I think that having been, a child of the carbon economy, literally surrounded by people with blue scars in their head. That's how carbon my childhood was, from blue scars in their foreheads from the coal. I think it is the duty of our generation, who lived through the height and boom of the carbon and fossil fuel economy, to bequeath a one-way downward slope of carbon net usage to the next generation as quickly as we can. And that really is my politics.
Your green credentials are as important to you and as central to you as your red credentials. Is that a fair way?
There's no red on a dead planet.
Paul Mason, fascinating to talk to you. Thank you for giving us your perspective and joining us on Personality Politics.